Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. 7 years away was long enough for thieves to forget who the land truly belonged to. When Elliot Blaine returned to his grandfather's ranch, he found a dog park, a forged lease, and a war brewing. But they picked the wrong man to steal from, and now he's coming for everything. It had been 7 years since I last set foot in Carbon County, Wyoming, but the moment my truck rolled past the faded sign reading Blaine Ranch Road, something in my gut twisted like a coiled rope being yanked hard. I slowed to a crawl, gravel crunching under the tires as memories swirled up with the dust. This stretch of land, this raw, sunburnt plateau, had been my grandfather's kingdom. Now, after years of active service, field work, and federal maps under my belt, I was finally back, ready to reclaim what was mine. The air was dry and sharp with sage, the sky an unbroken sheet of hard blue. My GPS chirped as I neared the coordinates, but something was wrong. There should have been a weather-beaten wooden arch over the gate, a crooked mailbox with my granddad's initials burned into the side. Instead, I saw steel gates, freshly welded, painted in HOA beige, flanked by cameras and, God help me, a vinyl sign reading, "Welcome to Eagle Crest, HOA Dog Training Grounds, private members only." I parked the truck and got out slowly, boots crunching on gravel. Beyond the gates, I could see that the fence line had changed. The original cedar posts were gone. In their place stood chain-link fencing, topped with barbed wire. The road that once led to my grandfather's house, now just a dirt path, was paved over in sections, curving slightly eastward. A dog agility field sat dead center where our porch used to be, plastic tunnels, rubber ramps. I could barely breathe. My first thought was, squatters. Then, no, this is worse. There was a prefab security shack by the gate with a man inside, slouched with a tablet. He didn't even look up when I approached. "You the owner here?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He snorted. "You HOA? No? Then you're trespassing, bud." I narrowed my eyes. "This land belongs to the Blaine family. Has since 1923. I'm Elliot Blaine." That got his attention. He stood up fast, shoulders squared like he expected a fight. "We've had this property under HOA designation for years, man. You're not on the list. You'll need to leave before I call management." I laughed. I actually laughed. "Buddy, I am the management. And unless this HOA has a time machine, they've got no legal hold here." I backed away before the guy could get twitchy, got in my truck, and pulled up the mobile records for the county land registry. My name was still there, right at the top. Elliot J. Blaine, sole beneficiary of the Blaine Family Trust. 160 acres of private, unimproved land, legally transferred upon my grandfather's death. No liens, no co-owners, no HOA declarations on file. But then I noticed something else, a document tagged from 3 years ago. Eagle Crest Hills Expansion Review. I opened it. It was a zoning proposal, one that included my land. There was a boundary map attached. In the key, my entire ranch was shaded green, marked Common Use Pending Claim. I knew that term. I'd helped fight similar language back when I worked on federal boundary disputes in Arizona. It's the legal equivalent of saying, "We think this is ours, and unless someone screams, we'll just go ahead and build." I was already dialing the county recorder's office. A woman named Bev picked up on the second ring, her voice the sweet, exhausted rasp of someone who'd worked 2 decades longer than intended. "Recorder's office, Bev speaking." "Bev, this is Elliot Blaine. I'm standing on my family ranch, and someone has built a goddamn dog park on top of it. What the hell is going on?" There was a pause, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. "Let me pull up the parcel." "Okay, yup, you're still the registered owner. The trust's in good standing. Last tax payment cleared 2 months ago. No liens, no transfers. What kind of structures are we talking?" "Security shack, gates, full refencing. Someone poured asphalt where my house used to be. There's a sign claiming it's HOA property." "Jesus." Bev's voice dropped to a whisper. "There was a boundary expansion filing from a group called Eagle Crest Hills HOA a few years back. They tried to redraw lines to claim unused land as part of their association zone. That included a dozen parcels, most of them empty or in probate. I remember it because they claimed you'd been served a notice, but there was pushback from another property owner, and it stalled. I'll check who signed your consent form." "I didn't sign anything," I snapped. "I didn't think so," Bev muttered. "Give me a day. I'll get you the original filing, signatures, timestamps. If there's forgery, we'll catch it. I killed the call and stared back at the gate. HOA. My ass. The sun was starting to drop, throwing long shadows over the field where I used to ride my granddad's old mare. I felt rage simmering under my ribs, not the loud, chaotic kind, but cold and calculated, the kind that meant action. Tomorrow, I'd be back, with bolt cutters if I had to. And if some Karen thought she could bulldoze my legacy into a pet training circus, she was about to find out what a real land surveyor does when you try to steal his map. By sunrise, I was already halfway back to the property, a thermos of black coffee rattling in the cup holder, and a full toolkit wedged behind the seat. I'd barely slept, too busy combing through old property scans, parcel overlays, and every document Bev had sent overnight. The HOA map they submitted was pure fiction. It took my actual parcel, erased the trust designation, and slapped on a new lot number, Lot 53, like it was part of some cookie-cutter development. The signature authorizing the change looked like someone had traced my name with a kindergarten marker, and whoever did it must have never met a geodetic analyst with 20 years of documentation under his belt. This wasn't just stupidity, it was theft with spreadsheets. When I pulled up to the gate, it was still locked. But the original post on the north side, the one my grandfather had hammered into the ground himself back in the 60s, was still standing. I used my angle grinder to slice through the new steel latch and swapped it out with a temporary chain lock I'd brought. 2 hired hands, local boys, college-aged and curious, arrived soon after in a dusty pickup. I told them what we'd be doing, clearing the rubble of the old porch, marking off original foundations, and installing clear boundary stakes with laminated notices stating private property not subject to HOA. They didn't ask questions, maybe because I was paying cash, maybe because they saw the storm cloud on my face. By mid-morning, the old front path had been swept clean. The corner where the house used to stand was now stripped of fake turf and dog ramps. I even found a buried concrete corner pin still intact under the northwest fence, proof positive that their new fencing line was 27 feet into my land. I recorded the coordinates and took time-stamped photos. One of the kids muttered, "Man, they built all this thinking you'd never come back." He wasn't wrong. And then she arrived. A black Mercedes SUV whipped up the dirt drive like it owned the county, leaving a plume of dust behind it. Out stepped a woman in high-waisted khakis and a pastel blazer like she was ready to judge a wine tasting. Platinum bob, designer sunglasses, the HOA version of a general at war. She didn't introduce herself. "You need to stop all this immediately," she snapped, marching toward me as if the air itself should part for her. "You're trespassing on managed HOA grounds, and you're in direct violation of multiple community codes." I wiped sweat off my brow and raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, which part of this is your land again?" She didn't flinch. "This is Eagle Crest Hills Parcel 53, designated for multi-purpose shared recreational use under Section 5.4 of our charter. You're not on the approved roster." I gestured to the 2 men clearing brush. "Well, Karen, do you mind if I call you Karen?" Her jaw twitched. "I'm standing on Blaine Ranch, 160 acres, registered under a trust filed 19 years ago and reaffirmed last quarter. Here's the original deed, here's the boundary overlay from the Department of the Interior, and here's a notarized affidavit from the county clerk stating you have no jurisdiction here." I handed her the folder, but she didn't even look at it. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling HOA enforcement and local law. You're damaging protected infrastructure, removing designated improvements, and interfering with lease access to a dog sport collective. This is criminal trespass, and you will be cited." The contractors looked nervously at me. I just smiled. "Please do. I'd love to see what your enforcement does when the sheriff shows up and sees your HOA markers sitting 100 feet past their lawful boundaries." She made the call anyway, walking off a few feet while she barked into the phone about hostile occupation and unauthorized construction. I heard the word arrest thrown around more than once. Then she hung up and crossed her arms triumphantly, like she'd just called in an airstrike. About 20 minutes later, a patrol SUV pulled in. Out stepped Deputy Ray Calder, a tall, slow-moving local with a sun-damaged face and the weary posture of a man who dealt with far too many HOA complaints. He recognized me instantly. "Blaine? Damn, I thought that was you. You really came back, huh?" I nodded. "Ray, good to see you." Karen rushed up, waving her hands like a malfunctioning semaphore. "Officer, this man has broken into our property, dismantled community structures, and threatened volunteers. He's impersonating a landowner. I demand a citation and removal immediately." Ray gave her a look like she'd just demanded an exorcism in the middle of the DMV. Then he turned to me. "You got documentation?" I handed him everything. Title history, deed, photographic overlays, my old grandfather's boundary survey with my initials scrawled on the bottom from when I was 16. Ray flipped through it all with deliberate slowness, then looked over at Karen. "Ma'am, nothing I see here suggests he's not within his rights. This land ain't HOA. It's not even on the updated precinct zoning for managed communities. You're standing on his land, not the other way around." Karen's mouth hung open. "That's impossible. I have maps. Official maps." Ray raised an eyebrow. "You mean these?" He held up one of the printouts from her expansion proposal. "These were filed as a request, not as a legal boundary change. And there's no record of approval, no public review, no signature from this man. Forgive me, ma'am, but unless you can prove otherwise, you're the one who needs to vacate." "I'll take this to the board," she snapped. "Do that. Meanwhile, you're not issuing any fines to this man. You're not calling contractors on his land. And you sure as hell aren't installing another camera on his fence." Karen stormed back to her car like it owed her money. She revved the engine hard before tearing off in a tantrum of flying dirt. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Ray nodded toward me. "You gonna be okay out here?" "I'll be fine. Got more fences to undo and a few lies to unwind." He chuckled. "Welcome back, Blaine." As he drove off, I turned back to the field. The sun had risen high, and the wind smelled like dry cedar and old defiance. The work was just getting started. 2 days later, I was back on the ranch early, coffee in hand, clipboard under my arm, and a roll of laminated private property signs slung over my shoulder like a quiver. The boys and I had made good progress restoring the perimeter, and I had just finished tracing the original eastern fence line using the last known boundary survey when I heard tires crunching gravel. At first, I thought maybe Karen was back for round 2, but this wasn't her Mercedes. It was a silver Tahoe with tinted windows and a small magnetic logo on the side. Ridgeline Realty, Luxury Properties. A tall man in a blazer stepped out, phone in one hand, keys in the other. Behind him followed a younger assistant holding a leather-bound folder and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. I called out as they approached. "Can I help you?" The guy gave me a brisk nod and smiled the way realtors do when they think you're the help. "Morning. We're here for the pre-listing walkthrough. Shouldn't take long." "Walkthrough of what?" He looked at his tablet. "Parcel 53, Eagle Crest Hills, 5-acre slice with commercial potential. The developer wants photos and measurements for a listing on Ridgeline Platinum. Says the HOA signed off already." I didn't say anything at first. I just walked over to my tool bucket, reached down, and pulled out a thick file folder. In it was a full-size copy of the Blaine Ranch Trust Deed, the original parcel description, and the recent GIS overlay from the Wyoming Survey Archive showing, in crystal-clear lines, that this ground, where they were standing, was mine. I handed him the packet. "There's not going to be a listing. There's not going to be a sale. And the HOA has no authority here. This isn't Parcel 53. This is the Blaine Trust, established in 1986, maintained and funded ever since. The so-called common grounds designation is a fabrication, and if you step another foot toward that ridge with your measuring tape, you're committing trespass." The agent frowned as he flipped through the paperwork. "Wait, this says your name is Elliot Blaine." "Correct. But the documents we have were signed by you. I mean, someone named Elliot Blaine, 7 years ago. It was all processed through a notary and confirmed by the HOA." I took a slow step forward. "Do you still have those documents?" He hesitated, then gestured to his assistant, who dug into her folder and produced a glossy packet. I took one look and felt my stomach knot. It was a special lease agreement, allegedly signed by me, dated in June of 2016. It authorized the HOA to lease out unused rural land for development partnerships with Ridgeline Realty. At the bottom was my name, typed in block letters, with a sloppy, crooked signature that looked like someone had practiced it while drunk. I didn't sign it. Not ever. I wasn't even in Wyoming in 2016. I was in Nevada, mapping flood zones near Lake Mead. And even if I had signed something, trust land like mine can't be leased without a witness from the Board of Trustees, of which I was the only member. I snapped a picture of the lease with my phone and returned the document. You've been had. That's a forged signature. The HOA has no lease rights, and this is private trust land under federal and state protection. I suggest you walk back to your car before you need a lawyer. The realtor was clearly shaken now. He turned to his assistant, muttering something, then looked back at me. I'll need to check this with our office. We were told everything was cleared. We had keys delivered, locks installed. My chest went cold. What locks? He motioned toward the driveway. On the side gate. We were told the HOA had contractors install smart locks last month for controlled access to the dog training site. We were given override fobs. I didn't answer him. I just walked past, straight toward the old access road that wrapped around the North Ridge. Sure enough, embedded in the original steel gate I'd left untouched was a new keypad lock, industrial grade, with a key fob sensor. My gate, my property. I pulled out my phone, dialed the sheriff's department, and reported unauthorized tampering of private entryways and potential property fraud. As I was giving the report, I took pictures of everything: the lock, the realtor's car, the document, the people. The officer on the line promised to send a deputy. While we waited, I popped open the utility box, bolted to the gatepost, and traced the wire leading to the lock. It was a cheap install, no conduit, bare wires. Someone had paid fast and cut corners. There was even a label left behind on the interior housing, installed by Prairie Fence and Security, invoice 28931. And that's when the nail went into the coffin. Prairie Fence had done the job, on my land, billed not to me, but to Eagle Crest HOA, under an order signed by K. Fitzroy. I showed the invoice to the deputy when he arrived, gave him the photos, the forged lease, and even pulled up a signed GPS timestamp showing my location during the alleged 2016 agreement. Nevada, 2 states away. The deputy whistled low. This is turning into a damn mess. He took statements from the realtors, photographed the new locks, and opened an incident report for forgery, unlawful entry, and fraudulent leasing activity. He promised to forward everything to the county investigator. Before he left, I asked him a favor. Can you run one more check? Has the HOA filed anything in the last week about my property? He stepped back to his patrol car, typed into the onboard terminal, and came back frowning. There was a supplemental application filed yesterday to the county recorder. Eagle Crest is attempting to reclassify your parcel as abandoned communal zone. They used the lease agreement as support. I let out a long breath. That's not just wishful thinking. That's calculated fraud. The deputy nodded. It's starting to look like it. I watched as the realtors quietly packed up and drove off without saying another word. The wind had picked up, blowing loose dust across the dog ramp debris we'd piled near the fence. I stood there alone on my own land, staring at a lock someone else had put on my gate, using my name. This wasn't just a rogue neighbor anymore. This was a full-scale land grab, and Karen Fitzroy had just escalated the game into federal territory. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear. No, that had burned off long ago, but because the sheer scope of what Karen had tried to pull was finally taking shape. I sat at my motel desk, my laptop glowing with maps, time-stamped photos, scanned signatures, notarized affidavits, and invoices. Each document felt like a brick in a legal war bunker, and I planned to stack them high enough to bury her HOA fantasy 6 feet under. By morning, I had a plan. Finish fencing the exposed northwestern perimeter, bring in a hydrologist to inspect the old well, and start prepping the stable foundation. If Karen wanted to wage war with paperwork, I'd hit back with a shovel and a court summons. But when I pulled up to the ranch that morning, my boots hit something far more toxic than a lawsuit. The air stank. Not manure, not diesel. Something acrid chemical, like wet cement mixed with iron. I rounded the path to the old well pit, and my stomach sank. The circular concrete ring that marked the top of the Blaine well, something my grandfather had dug with his own hands, was covered in dried gray sludge. The lid had been ripped open and left ajar. Cement splatter stretched a full 6 feet in every direction, hardened like blood in the dirt. I stepped closer and saw it. A layer of freshly poured quickset concrete in the well shaft. Not enough to plug it entirely, but enough to destroy the pump, the filtration system, and possibly contaminate the water table. A dead bird lay in the runoff, stiff as a brick. Next to the well was worse. The pasture, which we'd just cleared last week, was now littered with garbage. Industrial trash bags, stripped insulation, busted office chairs, and, God help me, a rusted refrigerator lying on its back with the door torn off like a bear had been at it. The grass was matted down like a truck had driven circles over it. I was still processing when I heard the engine, a county vehicle crawling up the trail. It stopped 50 yards out, and a woman in brown coveralls stepped out with a clipboard and a bright orange vest that said, "Y Deck Inspection." "Mr. Blaine," she called out. "Yeah." She walked up cautiously, already frowning. "We received an anonymous complaint yesterday evening. Illegal dumping, groundwater contamination, possible environmental violations. I need to inspect your well and take soil samples." I didn't even flinch. "Go ahead, but while you're at it, bring a criminal investigator, because this," I pointed to the concrete, "wasn't here yesterday, and I've got camera footage and GPS logs to back that up." She blinked, then crouched beside the well and ran her fingers along the hardened edge. "Jesus, this is industrial grade. Whoever did this had access to heavy mix. That's not just a prank, that's sabotage." I nodded. And it's not the first. While she got to work, I opened the Work Crew app on my phone, the same one that contractors in the region use to log jobs, mileage, and timestamps. I had a hunch and started scanning the public job logs for the past 48 hours in the Eagle Crest area. And there it was. Rock River Concrete, LLC, 14 cubic yards poured at Community Dog Grounds. Work logged under HOA Eagle Crest. Timestamp, yesterday, 6 p.m. Location tag, plus 41.709N, 106.288 exact coordinates of the Blaine Ranch wellhead. My jaw clenched. Whoever did this hadn't even bothered to mask the GPS. Probably figured no one would cross-check public work logs. I sent screenshots to my attorney, then walked over to my truck and pulled up the footage from the motion camera I'd hidden in a birdhouse near the gate. It showed a Rock River truck backing into my pasture right before sunset. 2 workers hauling concrete tubes, followed 15 minutes later by a white Lexus SUV idling at the edge, Karen's Lexus. The DEQ inspector looked pale by the time she finished her soil samples. "This isn't just a violation. If this gets into the county aquifer, it becomes a felony." "It already is," I said flatly. "And I want to file charges." She nodded. "We'll file an emergency report with the environmental prosecutor and turn your footage over to the sheriff's office." As she packed up, I surveyed the wreckage. The trash wasn't random. It was dumped in one clean pile, right in the middle of my field, meant to look like I'd staged a landfill. This wasn't sabotage. This was Karen trying to make my land look like a dump site, then pin the blame on me. And, as if on cue, I got a ping on my email. From HOA Eagle Crest subject, HOA violation notice, environmental breach. Dear Mr. Blaine, it has come to our attention that your use of the grounds currently designated as Parcel 53 has resulted in a significant environmental incident. This constitutes a breach of HOA community health standards. You are hereby fined $12,500 and referred to the local conservation board for further action. You have 7 days to remediate or vacate. She actually had the gall to put it in writing. I laughed, cold and low, then forwarded the email to my lawyer with the subject line, "Add this to the damn bonfire." That afternoon, the sheriff arrived, this time with a detective from County Environmental Crimes. They watched the footage. They walked the well. They saw the logs. And they saw Karen. As they packed up their evidence, the detective turned to me and said, "We'll be drafting a criminal complaint. This ain't civil anymore. And if she thinks she's clever, she's about to find out what environmental felony charges look like." By sundown, I had relocked the gates, filed official charges, and installed 2 more trail cams across the ridge. But even then, I didn't feel relief. Because Karen wasn't just pushing boundaries anymore, she was trying to poison my land. I thought the worst had already happened. I thought once Karen tried to poison my well, we'd reached the bottom of her pit. But as I learned that week, there's no floor when you're dealing with someone who's built their life on lies. There's only how deep they're willing to dig before they bury themselves. 3 days after filing the environmental sabotage complaint, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a man who introduced himself as Marcus Hall, a regional rep from Summit Line Properties, a real estate investment firm based out of Cheyenne. He said they were following up on an active land acquisition related to Parcel 53 and wanted to schedule a walkthrough prior to ground testing for upcoming residential development. I paused. "I think you've got the wrong property." "No," he said, confused. "We have a signed lease agreement recorded 2 months ago, authorized by your legal representative, a Ms. Karen Fitzroy. We've already put down the earnest money. The site plan includes 24 units of upscale eco-villas with HOA services. We're set to break ground in November." I nearly dropped my phone. I told him to email me the documents immediately. Within 10 minutes, I had PDFs in front of me with a forged limited power of attorney granting Karen the authority to represent the landowner in development negotiations. The signature listed under my name was a crude imitation dated 7 years back, ironically the same month I'd been deployed overseas. The notary stamp was a joke, expired, mismatched, and pulled from a long-dead business address. But the worst part? The documents had been used to transfer temporary land usage rights through a shell entity registered in Utah, then funneled back into Karen's HOA on paper as a community leasing agreement. It wasn't just paperwork fraud, it was a laundering scheme built on lies and loopholes. I stared at the screen, rage bubbling. She'd turned my ranch into a fake investment parcel, leased it under my name, and now had actual developers lined up to build luxury townhomes where my grandfather's barn once stood. And no one, not the developers, not the bank, not even the county, had caught it because the land had sat dormant for years. I called the sheriff immediately. This time, I didn't ask. I demanded fraud investigators from the county recorder's office, a forensic document analyst, and a full halt on any land activity under my parcel number. To his credit, the sheriff was on it fast. By noon, I was sitting in the recorder's office with the actual deed, side by side with the fake authority grant Karen had submitted through a third-party clerk. One glance was enough. The real signature on my original trust had been notarized by a military judge, stamped with federal validation from the DOD. The fake one was scanned from a driver's license application, slightly tilted, and copied across 3 separate documents. The clerk's face went pale. This isn't just a forgery. This is a chain fraud. By that afternoon, I had 3 investigators on site, scanning documents, collecting timestamps, and interviewing contractors who had been contacted by Karen or her so-called development board. Apparently, she'd created an entire digital HOA portal listing my property as upcoming land reallocation for suburban expansion. It even had fake bylaws, colored maps with my fences removed, and promotional videos using drone footage she probably pulled from Google Earth. My attorney filed an emergency injunction with the county judge within 24 hours. The request was clear: full cease and desist on all real estate transactions involving Parcel 53, immediate freezing of any land transfer records tied to Eagle Crest HOA, and criminal fraud charges against Karen Fitzroy for falsifying legal authority and attempting to sell real estate without ownership. We got the injunction. At 6 p.m., a plainclothes deputy and a court official hand-delivered the order to Karen's front door. According to a neighbor who texted me the play-by-play, she answered in pearls and slippers and turned sheet white when she saw the envelope. She tried to deny knowing anything until the deputy read the name Marcus Hall aloud and mentioned forged documents. She didn't speak another word, just took the papers and slammed the door. But the real punch came the next morning. When I drove back to the ranch, there were 2 unfamiliar cars parked outside the gate. Inside were 2 middle-aged women and a man in a suit, representatives of the Wyoming Board of Realtors, the State Notary Commission, and a county fraud unit liaison. All 3 had been alerted by my attorney. They walked the property, took photos of the fake fencing, the signs, the dog training field, asked detailed questions about the timeline, took copies of all the security footage I'd saved from my trail cams, and even downloaded the GPS logs from my drone flights that showed the evolution of the illegal structures over the past 2 years. By the end of the day, I signed 3 witness affidavits, 1 for criminal misrepresentation, 1 for notarial fraud, and 1 for attempted grand real estate theft, a felony with up to 15 years in prison in Wyoming. Karen had crossed the point of no return. And now it wasn't just about me anymore. The developers were furious. Their lawyers sent a separate fraud complaint to the state's attorney general. They'd put down deposits, hired contractors, and even taken early investor money based on Karen's forged paperwork. One of them screamed over the phone that they were going to nuke her into a crater in civil court. I hope they do, but I'm not waiting for them. Next stop, full court hearing. And I was bringing an arsenal. 2 nights after the injunction, I got an alert on my phone. One of my motion-activated cameras near the well lit up around 2:43 a.m. I checked the feed. 3 figures in hoodies dragging something heavy across the dirt. I zoomed in. It was a cement mixer. My stomach sank. By the time I got there, the sun hadn't even risen. The air reeked of something sour and chemical. I sprinted to the old wellhead and just stared. Chunks of dried concrete crusted around the rim. The bastards had poured quick-dry cement straight into it. I called the sheriff immediately, then my lawyer, then the Department of Environmental Quality. Within hours, we had a state inspector on site taking soil samples, photos, and core cuttings. The water line to the pasture was compromised, and runoff had already started pooling near the old corral. They marked it as critical contamination. Meanwhile, I pulled security footage from the surrounding cameras. One caught the license plate on the contractor's truck. The other caught Karen herself standing by the mixer barking instructions. A full 5 hours before her HOA email accused me of creating a hazardous illegal dumping site. I sent everything to the sheriff and DEQ. Karen had submitted an environmental complaint at 7:20 a.m. That footage of her on site, 2:40 to 3:15. She literally created the damage, then filed the report to blame me. But it got better. The contractors used an app called Work Crew to log hours and locations. Their job sheet? Pour concrete. HOA request. Time-stamped and GPS tagged. The company, when contacted, had no idea the land wasn't owned by the HOA. Their manager nearly choked when I played the footage. By the next day, Karen was being investigated for environmental sabotage and filing a false report. The DEQ issued a formal violation. The cleanup would cost tens of thousands, and it was all on her. I stood at the ruined well that night, flashlight in hand, the wind scraping dust across the field. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. She thought this would stop me. She'd only just confirmed she was losing. The official charges came faster than I expected. Karen was served with a criminal citation for environmental vandalism and a second for knowingly submitting a false report to a regulatory agency. Her mugshot ended up online within hours. Smudged eyeliner, stunned expression, as if the world had turned on her by surprise. HOA Facebook groups across 3 counties lit up like brush fires, but she didn't back down. That same evening, someone tried to break into the shipping container I kept on the property for tools and legal files. They weren't subtle. Cut lock, pry marks, tire tracks in the dirt. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. I changed every lock and installed 3 more cameras that same night. Then came the letters. Typed, anonymous, stuffed into my mailbox and posted on my gates. You don't belong here. Stop before someone gets hurt. One envelope had a dead prairie rattlesnake curled up inside, frozen and thawed. I turned it all over to the sheriff's office, who logged it as harassment tied to an ongoing criminal case. Still, no arrests. Yet. Meanwhile, my lawsuit against the HOA and Karen personally was moving forward. My lawyer, Rachel Mendelson, filed a civil suit for attempted fraud, unlawful property conversion, and punitive damages related to the forged documents and false tenancy. We also filed a motion to obtain HOA financial records, emails, and internal communications. Every scrap we could legally pull. The judge granted it. What we found made my jaw clench. Karen had paid herself a management fee for the HOA using funds collected from neighboring homes, then funneled tens of thousands into a beautification fund, most of which was spent on landscaping the dog field she built over my grandfather's old home site. She had signed off on her daughter's fake tenancy using a letter addressed to the HOA property manager, herself. And the supposed developer lease? A complete fiction. The company didn't even exist in state records. By the end of the week, the judge issued a freeze on all HOA financial activity pending trial. Karen's power base began to collapse. Members resigned. Some even came to my gate to apologize, handing me emails Karen had sent them, trying to justify reclaiming my land for the good of the community. The irony? Her community had started to see her for what she really was. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The courtroom was packed on the morning of the final hearing. Local press filled the back row, and a few neighbors sat on the edge of their seats like it was the Super Bowl. Karen entered with a lawyer she clearly couldn't afford. Her usual arrogant posture wilted under the weight of a dozen subpoenas. She didn't look at me once. My attorney presented everything in calm, devastating order. The notarized land deed with my name, the full geozone overlays confirming my property boundaries, the time-stamped footage of Karen pouring cement into my well, the falsified power of attorney dated 7 years after my grandfather's death. We even had testimony from the notary who confirmed the signature had never crossed her desk. The prosecution followed with records from the contractor's app, the environmental contamination report, the HOA's drained bank accounts, and a forensic email trail tracing Karen's fake developer pitch to a dummy LLC she created and dissolved in less than a month. Her daughter's lease, dated, unsigned, and unsupported by any tax or utility record. Karen's defense barely lasted 15 minutes. Her lawyer tried to claim confusion over lot lines and clerical errors. The judge wasn't amused. He asked her, on the record, if she understood what felony property fraud meant. She didn't answer, but the silence said enough. The ruling came quick. The court declared that the property known as the former Blaine Ranch was never subject to HOA control. All attempts to claim ownership through the HOA were unlawful. The forged documents amounted to real estate fraud. The environmental sabotage was a felony. Karen was sentenced to 12 years in state prison with no chance of parole before 5. The HOA Eagle Crest Hills was officially dissolved. Its remaining assets were seized to fund the cleanup and legal costs. The sheriff oversaw the eviction of Karen's daughter the following day. She left quietly, avoiding eye contact, dragging a suitcase over the patch of driveway that used to lead to my grandfather's porch. The dog training signs came down the same afternoon. I stayed behind until sunset, watching the wind clear the dust from the pasture. That night, I opened a bottle of whiskey and sketched out plans for the new house. A stone cabin like my grandfather's, but with a modern twist. 2 horses, a small barn, solar roof, and a sign at the gate that read, Private Ranch. You lost this fight, Karen.